In the late fall of 1763, a man sits by a frost-covered window in a small, damp cottage, his joints aching with a fire that feels as though it is fueled by the very mist rising from the marsh outside. For this man, and for millions like him throughout the centuries, a simple fever or the grinding pain of inflammation was not merely an inconvenience. It was a shadow that loomed over every hour of life. There were no plastic bottles filled with white pills, no chemical shortcuts to numb the senses. There was only the land, and the hope that something growing in it could stop the screaming in his bones. He had heard whispers of an ancient remedy, a bitter powder derived from a tree that stood tall where others drowned, a tree that seemed to thrive in the very cold and dampness that caused his agony. He took a small amount of this dried, powdered bark and mixed it with water, or perhaps a small dram of tea. Within hours, the fire in his blood began to cool. The grinding in his knees softened into a dull hum, and then silence. For the next century and a half, this living pharmacy was the most prized possession of physicians and explorers alike. But as the 19th century drew to a close, this miracle was systematically pushed into the shadows. It was replaced by a synthetic, lab-grown substance. While this modern substitute could silence pain quickly, it brought a hidden cost. It was an aggressive acid that caused gastrointestinal distress, stomach ulcers, and internal bleeding in millions of users. We traded a self-buffering, living entity for a chemical isolate that burns the very body it is meant to heal. That shimmering, silver-leaved ghost of the wetlands is the white willow, Salix alba, and it is the forgotten father of the modern aspirin. Welcome to Ancestral Yields. If you believe that nature's original blueprints are often superior to the synthetic shortcuts of the modern age, make sure to like this video and subscribe. The history of the white willow is as old as civilization itself, appearing as a prized resource across every major ancient culture. The earliest recorded use of willow bark for medicinal purposes dates back over 6,000 years to the Sumerians of the 3rd dynasty of Ur, where clay tablets describe the tree as a primary treatment for bodily pain. This was not a localized secret. By 1500 BC, the Egyptian Ebers Papyrus listed the willow as a sovereign remedy for inflammation. In the 4th century BC, Hippocrates, the father of medicine, formally recorded his observations, prescribing that women in the throes of childbirth chew the bark to mitigate the excruciating pain of labor. But while the ancients knew that it worked, it took an 18th century clergyman to prove how well it worked. On June 2, 1763, the Royal Society of London received a letter that would fundamentally alter Western medicine. It was written by the Reverend Edward Stone of Chipping Norton in Oxfordshire. Stone's discovery began 5 years earlier, driven by the geopolitical crisis of his time, the high cost and scarcity of Peruvian bark called cinchona, the only known treatment for malaria and fevers, which had to be imported from South America. Walking through the English wetlands, Stone tasted the bark of the white willow and was struck by its intense bitterness, a flavor profile nearly identical to the expensive Peruvian import. Guided by the doctrine of signatures, he hypothesized that since the willow thrived in the same damp, swampy regions that bred fevers and agues, it must contain the cure. Stone did not stop at a hypothesis. He launched one of the first rigorous clinical trials in history. He gathered the bark in the summer when the sap was full, carried it to a local baker, and had it dried in the oven to ensure consistent moisture removal before pulverizing it into a standardized powder. Over 5 years, he administered specific doses. 1 dram, about 1.7 grams, every 4 hours, to 50 patients suffering from violent fevers and rheumatic pains. He documented every case. In his letter to the Earl of Macclesfield, the president of the Royal Society, Stone reported a 100% success rate, stating the bark was a powerful astringent that never failed to break the fever. This was the moment the willow moved from folklore to the standard of care. For the next century, salicin derived from willow was the gold standard. Found in the kits of every frontier doctor, prized for its ability to treat the inflammations of the joints that we now recognize as arthritis. But the tide started to turn at the dawn of the 19th century, at the beginning of the chemical age, when focus shifted from managing living landscapes to isolating individual molecules in a laboratory. In 1828, Joseph Buchner successfully isolated the active principle of the willow, a yellow crystalline substance he named salicin. Once the molecule was identified, the medical community no longer saw a need for the forest. They only saw the chemical. In 1897, Felix Hoffmann, a chemist at the Bayer Company, sought a way to make salicin less bitter for his father's debilitating arthritis. By adding an acetyl group to the molecule, he created acetyl salicylic acid. In 1899, Bayer patented this synthetic version under the name Aspirin. This was the definitive industrial divorce between botany and pharmacy. The commercial allure of a patented, shelf-stable and uniform pill meant that the pharmaceutical industry could abandon the labor-intensive process of harvesting bark. Synthesis from coal tar and petroleum derivatives was significantly cheaper than maintaining willow groves. The narrative surrounding the willow changed almost overnight. It was recast in agricultural textbooks as a weed that interfered with productive farmland. The medical community pushed the synthetic isolate as a symbol of progress, while whole bark preparations were dismissed as old-fashioned. In the rush toward the 20th century, the nuanced safety of the willow was traded for the brute force of the synthetic pill, a move that researchers now identify as a primary cause of millions of cases of non-steroidal anti-inflammatory drug-induced gastric damage. The white willow demonstrates a level of biological resilience that modern crops cannot fathom. It is a riparian warrior, specifically designed to thrive in environments that would kill almost any other tree. Most trees drown in waterlogged soil because their roots suffocate. The white willow has evolved a specialized tissue called parenchyma, a system of internal snorkels that allows it to transport oxygen from its leaves down into its submerged roots. This allows it to dominate floodplains, acting as a living anchor that prevents soil erosion. The tree's regenerative capacity is bionic. It produces massive quantities of indole 3-butyric acid, a powerful rooting hormone. If a storm snaps a branch and sweeps it downstream, that branch only needs to snag in wet mud to begin a new life. Within days, it will sprout roots and begin growing a new trunk. This immortality makes it one of the most successful colonizers of disturbed landscapes on the planet. Willow bark typically contains between 1% and 10% salicin by dry weight. A 100-gram portion, equivalent to 3.5 ounces, of dried willow bark can yield up to 10,000 milligrams of salicin. However, the true genius of the willow is not the salicin alone, but the secondary compounds that the pharmaceutical industry discarded. Synthetic aspirin is an active acid that begins inhibiting stomach-protecting prostaglandins the moment it hits the gastric mucosa. The white willow, however, contains a natural buffer of tannins and flavonoids, including quercetin and catechin. Research published in Phytotherapy Research confirms that these polyphenols protect the stomach lining and provide a broader anti-inflammatory effect than the isolated molecule. While a standard aspirin tablet is 325 milligrams of a single aggressive acid, willow bark provides a complex of over 40 different bioactive compounds that work synergistically. In terms of concentration, willow bark extract standardized to 15% salicin provides approximately 60 to 120 milligrams of salicin per dose. While this sounds lower than a 325 milligram aspirin, the prodrug nature of salicin means it is inert in the stomach and is only converted into salicylic acid by the liver. This metabolic pathway ensures the stomach is never exposed to the acid directly. Nonetheless, there is a factual barrier to willow bark, the lag time. Because it contains salicin, a prodrug that must be processed by the liver, it takes approximately 2 to 3 hours to provide relief. Synthetic aspirin, already in its active form, works in 20 to 30 minutes. In a culture that demands immediate results, the 3-hour wait is seen as a failure. There is also the issue of standardization, as salicin concentration varies by soil and season. A nightmare for a pharmaceutical industry that requires every pill to be identical. This is not medical advice. Consult a professional before changing your health regimen. White willow bark carries the same risks as aspirin for certain individuals. It must never be given to children or teenagers recovering from viral infections due to the risk of Ray's syndrome, a life-threatening condition. Those with blood clotting disorders, those taking blood thinners, or anyone with an aspirin allergy must avoid it entirely. If you are ready to plant your own, the tree is incredibly easy to cultivate in the United States, thriving in USDA zones 3 through 9. It is effectively unkillable as long as it has access to water. If you have a low spot in your yard where the grass is always soggy, or a spot near a pond or stream, that is where the willow belongs. To plant, you can purchase unrooted cuttings or whips from reputable sources like Strictly Medicinal Seeds or Raintree Nursery. Simply take a 12-inch cutting and shove it into the wet ground during the early spring. It will root itself and can grow up to 10 feet in a single season. Many homesteaders use coppicing, where the tree is cut back to the ground every year, forcing it to send up straight, flexible shoots that can be harvested for bark without killing the rootstock. A critical safety note: you must be able to identify the tree. The white willow is distinguished by its long, lance-shaped leaves, with fine, silky white hairs on the underside. Beware of poison sumac, which also grows in wet areas, but has compound leaves with 7 to 13 leaflets and smooth edges, whereas willow leaves are simple and alternate. Identify the tree by those leaf characteristics. The white willow acts as a biological vacuum cleaner. Through phytoremediation, the tree's root system absorbs toxins from the soil. Peer-reviewed research has shown that the white willow can effectively remove heavy metals like lead, cadmium, and even uranium from contaminated sites. It is currently being used on industrial brownfields to take up diesel fuel and chemical runoff, cleaning the ground so that other life can return. Never forage in areas near highways or industrial zones, because the willow will absorb any pesticides or heavy metals present in the runoff. If you enjoyed this video, remember to give it a like and subscribe for more. See you in the garden.